They're not just grooming your children in their sexual and gender ideology. They're also using CRT to turn them into good little communists.
That is what CRT, that is CRT, and that is what should not be taught.
Well, I mean, we may disagree on that point, but
Well, wait,
I
I'm
guess
black.
my point-
I'm black, so what do you mean you disagree with that?
I guess my point
Okay,
is,
I'm the one taking this. You can say that all you want. I'm the one who grew up black taking the slings and arrows, okay? Not you.
May I?
That's a fair point. And with that, we're going to continue the presentation.
So
Thank
if I
you,
could,
Mr. Myers.
if I could
Yes,
just
ma'am.
finish.
Order, please. We have Dr. Wu
So,
next.
point taken.
Yes, the school board member,
No, do you? Do you?
please.
Did I say I
board
spoke for
member.
you?
Ma'am.
I didn't say I
ma'am,
spoke for you.
Ma'am, thank you. I know. Thank you. All right.
She had another question. Yes,
Mrs.
ma'am.
Barclay. Mrs. Barclay. One more
So,
question, then let's bring in Dr. Wu. Ma'am.
Our next speaker, thank you. Our next speaker is Professor Walter Myers. He holds a master's degree in philosophy from Biola University's Talbot School of Theology, where he is the adjunct faculty professor in the Master of Arts in Science and Religion program. He is also a senior fellow at the Seattle-based Discovery Institute, where he writes on science, education, and energy. Walter is also a board member of the Orange County Classical Academy, a tuition-free classical charter school based in Orange, California. Professor Myers has authored several published articles on critical race theory, examining inequity in education. The topics Professor Myers will cover are the roots of CRT, which we already had several audience members ask us, who started critical race theory, how it was implemented, how it was developed. All of that will be answered by Professor Myers. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. And thank you for having me. Okay, this might get a little dry, but I'll try to liven it up a little bit because it pretty much is the history of critical race theory. So critical race theory has its roots in what's called critical theory. It's been in academia for about 4 decades, but it's recently come to the fore, the public consciousness, due to advocacy that CRT either be taught in K through 12 or influence K through 12 instruction regarding lingering inequities in education. So I want to be clear that CRT with respect to education makes some astute and I believe correct observations about the current state of K through 12 education. While I don't agree with many of its premises or prescriptions, I believe it deserves a fair hearing. Critical theory is based on, now I'm going to go back to critical theory, which is based on the early 20th century thought of neo-Marxist Antonio Gramsci, founder of the Italian Communist Party. Dissatisfied with the progress of communism based on the unrealized predictions of 19th century social revolutionists Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, Gramsci believed that workers were not revolting and overthrowing the bourgeoisie, the ruling middle and upper class, because they had bought into the belief system of the ruling class, which focused on the family, nation state, the capitalist system, and God. Thus, to spur on revolution, Gramsci argued that societal norms and institutions needed to be torn down. Gramsci's primary legacy is his argument that human history has always been divided into 2 basic groups, the oppressor and the oppressed. Power, according to Gramsci, was exercised by the privileged groups or classes, either through domination, force, or coercion. He called this hegemony, where the ideological supremacy of the system of values supports the interests of the dominant group. The subordinate groups are influenced to internalize the values of the privileged groups, thus consenting to their own marginalization. According to Gramsci, there are no absolute moral standards universally true for all human beings outside of any given historical context. All morality is socially constructed. Thus, morals, values, truths, and human nature itself aren't objectively true, but products of distinct historical periods. What was needed, according to Gramsci, was a new system of values that would overthrow the bourgeois regime and empower the subordinate groups. This is where we begin to see the notion of group-based morality, where the idea is that what is moral is what serves the interest of the oppressed or marginalized ethnic, racial, and gender groups. In 1935, scholars from the Institute for Social Research in Frankfurt, Germany, known commonly as the Frankfurt School, left Nazi Germany to escape the Third Reich, eventually landing in New York, where they set up shop at the Columbia University. Modeled on the Moscow-based Marx Engels Institute and strongly influenced by Gramsci, they were one of the first examples of what we today call Western Marxist schools of thought. In 1937, they published their manifesto, which made a relentless attack specifically on Western institutions and values. They argued that the traditional theory of the West had an irrational commitment to knowledge, seeing truth as empirical and universal, whereas critical theory held the view that man could not be objective and that there are no universal values. While in the United States, they developed the same view of the American worker that Gramsci had felt in his home country of Italy, believing Americans were a slave to the same ideology. So while most of the Frankfurt scholars went back to Germany, Herbert Marcuse stayed behind and became one of the leading spokespersons of critical theory. So during the massive upheavals of the 1960s and 1970s caused by the riots and violence associated with the civil rights era and the anti-Vietnam movement, Marcuse discovered a category of people whose grievances could be leveraged to further critical theory: racial minorities. These were the people he saw as outcasts and outsiders, exploited and persecuted by a system of oppression. As at this point, critical legal theory takes over. So critical legal theory came about in the early 1970s. It argues that with respect to social issues, the law has inherent social biases and thus supports the interests of those who create the law, a power dynamic that has historically favored the privileged and disadvantaged the historically underprivileged. As with critical theory, critical legal theory was designed as an instrument to overthrow society from a legal perspective, aiming to transform existing societal structures through a critique of the injustices within the system based on a racist, capitalist patriarchy since the founding of America, attacking the notion that law and institutions, and this is the key, can be neutral as they necessarily mask. See, even in they're saying, even if there's something, a law is neutral, it's masking the power of the ruling class. So from CLT, critical legal studies, you had sort of these other folks who broke off from that, and it's sort of a short step then to critical race theory. So well-known scholars of the movement, some of you may know them: Derek Bell, my favorite, Kimberly Crenshaw, Richard Delgado. According to Delgado, CRT, and this is how he defines it, is a scholarly pursuit engaged in studying and transforming the relationship between race, racism, and power. CRT sprang up in the 1970s when a group of progressive lawyers, activists, and legal scholars across the country felt the advances of the civil rights era of the 1960s had stalled, and in many respects had been rolled back, as in the abandonment of affirmative action, the resegregation of most schools, and the growing racial achievement gap. This includes issues of school discipline, high-stakes testing, and controversies over curriculum and history. The first key tenet of CRT is its assertion that the law has been historically complicit in upholding white supremacy, which is the social domination and subordination of blacks and other people of color. Though the contemporary legal principle is that the law should be colorblind and subsequently treat all people equally, CRT believes it is defective in that it only serves to remedy the most blatant forms of discrimination, such as mortgage redlining and academic hiring practices. Even though the law has worked to suppress explicit forms of white racism, everyday social practices in America continue outside the purview of legal remediation. In other words, critical race theorists believe racism has been and continues to be pervasive, systemic, and deeply ingrained, and is a permanent part of the American culture. Critical race theorists believe common liberal ideas such as colorblindness, formal legal equality, and integrationism are simply rhetorical tools of power incorporated in American academic and workplace institutions, supported by Supreme Court jurisprudence that has accepted and confirmed an oppressive racial regime in the decades after the Civil Rights era. They cite court cases where the Supreme Court has eschewed race-conscious policies in the areas of minority set-asides, de facto racial segregation, and voting rights. And interestingly, critical race theorists admit that these decisions are consistent with neutral liberal racial principles. However, they reject the classical liberal visions of racial justice, seeing them as an attack on government efforts to address continuing societal racial discrimination. Now, the second key tenet of CRT, sometimes called interest convergence, is a notion advanced by Derek Bell, who argues that in achieving racial equality, the interests of blacks will only be accommodated when they converge with the interest of whites. In other words, a judicial remedy for racial equality will not be authorized if that remedy in any way threatens the superior social status of middle and upper class whites. Perhaps shocking to some, Bell uses Brown as a notable legal example, Brown versus Board of Education, whose result was more in the self-interest of elite whites than the court's desire to help blacks. It ameliorated criticism from communist countries during the Cold War and reassured blacks who recognized that the Soviet Union, whom they fought against in World War II, acknowledged their full human dignity. As to the first tenet, it is an unfortunate fact that in the past, laws were oftentimes explicitly written to discriminate against blacks and other people of color. And even neutral laws were often intentionally and purposefully abused. However, these discriminatory laws have largely been written out over the course of the past 50 years, been struck down by the courts, or replaced with non-discriminatory laws by Congress and state legislatures. While it's true the colorblind neutral liberal ideology has its limitations, it cannot reach into the hearts and minds of human beings in their everyday social practices to completely eliminate discrimination. So the argument that racism continues to be systemic and supported by law, to me, it's unconvincing, particularly when virtually all of our urban areas are run by people of color. We're running the urban areas. We are. 21 out of the 22 are majority black, 21 out of 22 major urban cities are mostly blacks, and it's mostly Hispanics and blacks. It's us. We're running our cities, our urban cities. Now, I want you to listen to this as far as where I'm going with this. Okay, so on interest convergence, I think it's a bit tenuous, because the thing is, as a black person who grew up in the 70s, I did benefit from that, okay? If whites benefited, I don't care. The thing was, I know that there were pools I couldn't go to, but that I could now go to, okay? Because I couldn't go to them before, okay? So what I think Bell gets correct is that the focus after Brown, and I really want to make this point, the focus after Brown was wrongly on integration, because it had mixed results, and it often ended in violence and white flight over the course of the 2 decades. And from where I went, I'm from Richmond, Virginia, all the white people flew out to Henrico and Chesterfield County. They went west, okay? They left us. And the house I moved into when I was a kid, there was the last white family in downtown Richmond, Virginia, in our area. Now, according to CRT scholar Gloria Ladson-Billings, many schools are just as segregated now as they were prior to 1954. Although black students comprise 12% of the national population, they are the majority in 21 of the 22 largest urban school districts. And Ladson-Billings and Bell argued that the focus should have been on providing black children with equal and adequate school resources, wholly apart from whether the school was segregated or desegregated or not. That's where I think they really missed it. I didn't care whether I was going to a all-black school. What I cared about was the education I was getting, and that is the tragedy today. Now, here's another thing that I think most people don't know about what the critical race theorists believe. What Bell and other critical race theorists also get right is that the public school system in urban areas are failing. While the race-conscious approach to K-12 education advocated by critical race theorists to remediate all that went wrong after Brown is, I don't think it's the right approach. I do think we have common ground. Namely, we would agree that urban public school failures are in large part due to massive and inefficient bureaucracies, one-size-fits-all approach to education with little to no innovation, and teachers' unions that advocate for teachers at the expense of students and parents. And that is CRT. That is Derek Bell. Okay? All right. Now let me talk to you a little bit about the education achievement gap. Let's look for a moment at the state of education in California for black and Latino students, okay? Which is why I can't even believe we're talking about CRT here. Amen. Black and Latino students significantly trail white and Asian American students in meeting the state's reading and math standards. In 2019, 21% of black students and 28% of Latino students were proficient in math, compared to 54% of white students and 74% of Asian students. 33% of black students and 41% of Latino students were proficient in English, compared to 65% of white students and 77% of Asian students. Black and Latino students trail in graduation rates. From 2018 to 2019, black students graduated at a rate of 77%, and Latino students graduate at a rate of 82%, while white students graduate at a rate of 84%, and Asian students graduate at a rate of 94%. Black and Latino students trail even further with respect to post-secondary school preparedness. 24% of black students and 36% of Latino students were prepared for college, compared to 54% of white students and 74% of Asian students. So less than 1/4 of black students coming out of LAUSD are even qualified. How are they ever going to rise up the economic ladder? With no education. So with the current failure to adequately prepare black and Latino students for career success relative to white and Asian students, I don't envision how CRT is going to spur black or Latino students onto academic achievement. If in their classes they're told they're oppressed and they can't succeed because America is inextricably racist, then why would they be motivated to get their lesson done? Okay? Oh, but then if you go and you tell the white kid that you're an oppressor, what psychologically are you doing to that child?
Keep order in here, thank you.
Okay? So, now I want to talk a little bit about ethnic studies because this is where I think is, I'm sorry.
We have a 2-minute warning.
2-minute warning, okay.
Yes.
So, Governor Gavin Newsom signed the AB 101 legislation in October 2021, making California the first state to require all students to complete a semester-long course in ethnic studies, okay? The California State Board of Education adopted a highly controversial model curriculum in March 2021, which is encouraged but not required by school districts. I guess you all know that, okay? Now, I do support ethnic studies in California schools, but I don't believe ethnic studies should in any manner associate itself with CRT. Though proponents of ethnic studies claim there's no relationship between ethnic studies and CRT, a cursory reading of the ethnic studies model curriculum, you can look it up, you can Google it yourself, demonstrates the statement to be disingenuous as disingenuous as it is false. In Chapter 3 of the ESMC, it specifically states CRT as a key theoretical framework that can be used in ethnic studies research and instruction, citing an article from the American Bar Association titled A Lesson in Critical Race Theory. Interestingly, the referenced ABA article makes no mention of its underlying neo-Marxist ideology. I believe the intent is to obfuscate the core of CRT ideology, and so I'd assert that you cannot separate, in other words, you cannot separate CRT from its neo-Marxist philosophy. When you're not teaching CRT, if you're teaching CRT as a subject, what you're teaching is you're actually talking about what are the continued inequities since, not going back 100 years, what are the continued inequities for black and brown children in the education system? What are those continued inequities? That is what it's talking about with respect to education, but it's much broad, CRT is much broader. We're talking about it only in the context of education. So the thing is what you don't, and also if you're teaching CRT, what they're saying is you're teaching a philosophy, you're teaching an ideology. Okay, it's a way of teaching and what you're inculcating in the children. And that is what I think is wrong. If you want to teach it as a subject, fine, but certainly I wouldn't see it in the lower grades. I know at Orange County Classical Academy, if we were to teach about CRT, it would be in high school. It certainly wouldn't be in K through 8. It just doesn't have a place in that. So the thing is, I think we have to talk about, if you say you don't want people start teaching philosophies, Christianity, whatever in the schools, well, you certainly don't want them teaching neo-Marxist ideology either. So I'll end there.
Critical race theory that were meritorious, such as what you stated about Derek Bell. I think we can all be angry about the achievement gap that persists for Latino students, for black students, because they always sell us ideologies and we never breach the academic gap. We're in perpetual poverty cycle, and that riles me up.
Esther, sorry to interrupt. Jason, those students that left are not to be allowed back in the building.
Thank you. So I wanted to go back to what you stated with Derek Bell. What other tenets can we actually teach here in Temecula Valley School District as part of critical race theory? It is in your resolution. The theory can be taught. It's right here. I have it in black and white. What else, other than the academic gap, what else is meritorious about this theory that we need to pay attention to? I see several signs here about black history, about slavery, about the institution of slavery, about the laws that were institutionalized against blacks, that kept blacks enslaved and in perpetual subhuman status. That's a reality. What else would you like to add to that?
I mean, really, I mean, when you, in terms of CRT, I mean, it really only goes back, CRT itself only really goes back to 1954, because it really is focusing on what are the inequities that have continued since the Civil Rights era, since Brown versus Board of Education and then the Civil Rights legislation in 1964. It really doesn't go back beyond that. I mean, where it goes back into 1930s and everything is really going back to neo-Marxist ideology. That's where it's going back. So it has, CRT has absolutely nothing to do with African-American history or what happened 100 or 150 years ago with slavery. It has nothing to do with that. It really is about legal theory with respect to inequities in society, and education is only a part of that, because they
So
do also
it's still
talk
going
about
to
other
be
things.
taught. So we have several people here that want Black history to be taught. See, this resolution's not banning Black history.
It has nothing to do with Black history.
For the
CRT
back
has
row.
absolutely
Say
nothing
it
to do with
again.
Black history. Nothing to do with Black history.
All right. Thank you.
Could I ask a quick question?
This is a board workshop, absolutely.
So I do have a question regarding that. How would you suggest, because there's specific language that's banned in this resolution, so how would you suggest that a teacher teach about Black history or some of these other topics such as the Holocaust without ever using the term oppressed and oppressor?
Are you asking me the question?
Yes.
Well, I mean, we were oppressed. We were.
Okay,
So-
so, because the resolution states that we are not allowed, teachers are not allowed to teach using the words oppressed or oppressor. So you would disagree with that?
No, well, the
piece
thing
of
is,
the
I don't
resolution?
know what context is being used, but I'm just going to speak for myself, because I don't know. I'm just going to
Okay.
speak for myself.
I appreciate that.
We were oppressed.
Thank you.
Okay, we were.
let me
So
also
if you're
res-
going to teach, about Black history, you are teaching about oppression, because we were oppressed. I think oppression in this case, they're talking. Okay, the context of CRT is oppression with respect to that there's a systemic oppression, and that systemic oppression continues on into today, where Blacks and brown people are oppressed by a white hegemony. That is what CRT. That is CRT, and that is what should not be taught.
Well, I mean, we may disagree on that point, but.
Well, wait.
I
I'm
guess
Black.
my
I'm
point-
Black. So what do you mean you disagree with that?
I guess my point
Okay,
is-
I'm the one taking this. You can say that all you want. I'm the one who grew up Black, taking the slings and arrows. Okay, not you.
May I,
That's a fair point. And with that, we're going to continue the presentation.
So
Thank
if I
you,
could,
Mr. Myers.
if I
Yes,
could just
ma'am.
finish.
Order, please. We have Dr. Wu
So,
next.
point taken.
Yes, the school board member.
No, do you? Do you?
Please.
I didn't.
The
Did I
school
say I
board
spoke for
member.
you?
Ma'am.
I didn't say I
ma'am,
spoke for you.
Ma'am, thank you. Thank you. I know. Thank you. All right.
She had another question.
Mrs.
Yes, ma'am.
Barclay. Mrs. Barclay. One more
So,
question, then let's bring in Dr. Wu.
Esther, would you like me to respond to that?
Ma'am,
Off the rails.
thank you.
well, I'm just trying to speak about the resolution at hand, which is what I thought we were here to discuss. So that is my question, is regarding the resolution. But I do think that our panelist does probably agree with me that the way the resolution is written, that teachers should be allowed to use the term oppressed and oppressor. So, thank you.
May I
I've read
hop
that
on that
resolution.
point, please?
I'm sorry.
Just one moment, please.
If you don't mind.
Yes, the board member.
I've read the resolution many times over and over again, and it does not ban any specific language, including any words, including oppressor and oppressed.
No.
It bans ideology, not
We can
language.
read it. What, could you just tell me what that sentence says?
It's
I could be
page 3,
incorrect.
subsection B, and I will read, and it's right here if anybody wants a copy. It says, subsection B, individuals are either a member of the oppressor class or the oppressed class because of race or sex. Is that what you were alluding to?
No, I think it's on the, further on in.
With, that is, those are the doctrines.
Would you like me
We can move on. It's fine. I'll find it.
Yeah, and Mrs.
That's
Barclay,
the
we
only
can,
oppressed or
we can do our
oppressed.
board comments at the end too. Okay, we'd like to bring in Dr. Wu on Zoom.
So
I know
were you
she's in
going to
the
ask
waiting
the
room.
crowd to be quiet in those points? Because I think you were asking these people to be quiet
you.
when they were laughing
Thank you,
and
Mrs.
cheering,
Barclay. We
but
have
not
Dr.
this
Wu
group.
in the waiting room. Thank you. Order,
Just
please.
asking. Okay, just making a point that we want to be fair here.
You know you're in a cult if 1. You believe you are what your imagination says you are. Delusional, characterized by or holding false beliefs or judgments about external reality that are held despite incontrovertible evidence to the contrary, typically as a symptom of a mental condition. You know you're in a cult if 6. You believe reality isn't real. Delusional, characterized by or holding false beliefs or judgments about external reality that are held despite incontrovertible evidence to the contrary, typically as a symptom of a mental condition. You know you're in a cult if 10. Thanks to Jamie Lee Curtis, who didn't know how many Oscars she'd won, them can't count. You know you're in a cult if 11. You will cry in protest to take a real black woman off a syrup bottle and a Quaker off a box of oats named Quaker Oats, only to put a fake white woman on a beer can. All while saying, I can't believe they're so upset over a beer can. Bud Light parent Anheuser-Busch's stock has lost $27 billion over Dylan Mulvaney. You know you're in a cult if 13. If you get triggered because someone doesn't think you're special because you were born into one of the CRT-approved victim groups, they believe deeds and personal responsibility warrant pride. You know you're in a cult if 18. Lost your shit over To Kill a Mockingbird and Huckleberry Finn but are screaming about banning books with gay sex and masturbation in school libraries. You know you're in a cult if 20. Will lie even with irrefutable evidence. You know you're in a cult if 21. Being so filled with hate, you will groom, mutilate, and murder your own children, all while calling your opposition fascists. You know you're in a cult if 22. Believes that out of 7 billion people on the planet, white, straight, males are somehow oppressing everyone else. You know you're in a cult if 23. Will lose your shit when someone points out that you're not oppressed, you're just stupid. You know you're in a cult if 25. Will refer to a biology book as right-wing propaganda. You know you're in a cult if 26. Will lose your shit if someone actually uses proper English, instead of your made-up pronouns. You know you're in a cult if 32. Are the same people who say you can't indoctrinate kids to be gay with a book or a drag show, but continually accuse the church of doing that very thing. Although religion isn't taught in schools, and you're not forced to go to church. You know you're in a cult if 33. When someone is simply talking science and common sense, you will try to bring religion into it. Well, you know the church. Well then, don't go to church. It's not against the law. Not going to school is. You know you're in a cult if 34. Will use unrelated behavior to justify their sick, grooming behavior. You know you're in a cult if 39. Will lose your shit when someone says you're in a woke cult, and to prove you're not, you do the things on this list over and over and over. You know you're in a cult if 40. Will accuse your opposition of that which you are guilty. You know you're in a cult if 46. Consider chemically castrating a pedophile horrible and inhumane, but chemically castrating a child just dandy.